Good sign. Welcome to the Frontline Club. My name is Matilda and I will be your host for this evening. Now we're here to celebrate the launch of the new Byzantines, The Rise of Greece and Return of the Near East by Sean Mathews. It's a book that asks us to look at an ancient crossroads of civilization in a new light, and a very colourful light, as you'll see when you get the chance to give it a read. Tonight's event is hosted by Middle East Eye, where Sean and I work together on different sides of the Atlantic. I've never met him in person until this week, but I've interviewed him many times, so I can guarantee that you are in for a fascinating evening. Boring stuff out of the way, phones on silent, the fire exit is there, the bathrooms are there, so if in doubt, that's your door. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for tonight. David Hearst is the editor-in-chief and co-founder of Middle East Eye, and he'll be giving tonight's keynote address. David.
Hello, and I'm delighted to be here speaking to Sean's book with such distinguished company, like His Excellency, the Ambassador, Yanis Tsoutis. Thank you for being here. Woody Allen once admitted to cheating in the philosophy exam he was at by looking into his neighbor's soul. Sean has written a rough guide into Greece's soul. It's a journey that takes you way off TripAdvisor's website. In fact, this trip is not to be advised at all. It starts in a nightclub in Piraeus, takes you lurching to Thessaloniki, from there to Kavala, to a hotel where the owner chucks her guests out. They're paying up to €1,000 a night because they speak in the swimming pool. To Cairo, to Jerusalem, to Istanbul, back to Thrace. His thesis, richly supported by interviews, is that Greece and Greeks are the new Byzantine. Sean's journey reads deceptively like a travelogue. I say deceptively because there's a large amount of original reporting here, research and scholarship. There's a refreshing absence of the internet, tweets, social media, all the things that plague my life, but which are the staple now of foreign reporting. I hold my head in my hands. And there's something really old-fashioned about this book. It's written by a guy who's gone through several pairs of shoes and trainers beating around the Near East. It harks back to the days when the only Brits you found around in the Peloponnesus were gentlemen writers, scholars, and spies. Some were all three, like Patrick Leigh Fermor or David Holden. I knew David Holden. My father, Stephen Hearst, did a BBC documentary with him and columns, and a book of the same name is quoted in Sean's book. David's murder in a taxi outside Cairo airport was an international mystery and outwitted even the investigative powers of the Sunday Times under Harry Evans. Right up until her death, Ruth Holden, David's widow, did not know who had killed or who had ordered the assassination of her husband. A book has recently emerged claiming that David was a KGB agent killed by Egyptian intelligence on behalf of the CIA. As you soon learn when you live in Moscow, Russia is a country with an unpredictable past. The same applies to Sean's account of New Byzantine. His narrative darts around at least 3 centuries simultaneously. He claims the Super League football club of PAOK is ne Byzantium in a nutshell. He claims the port of Kavala is responsible for the founding of the modern state of Egypt. These are big statements to make, but they are true. The birthplace of a Turkish-speaking, Kavala was the birthplace of a Turkish-speaking tobacco merchant, Muhammad Ali Pasha, who enlisted in the army of Sultan Selim I, the Ottoman army, and he went on to oust Napoleon's army from Egypt. Sean writes that Muhammad Ali or Ali Pasha would have thrived in today's transactional hard power world. There are 2 key chapters of the book, which are so current, they're in danger of being rewritten as we speak. The first is about Greece's concern about Turkey's relationship with Egypt. And the second is the alliance between Egypt and Israel, which took such a leap forward under the socialist Tsipras' premiership. I would like to utter one word of warning about recreating for a modern state the image of a multi-ethnic empire, be they New Ottoman or New Byzantine. No choice with each other. This apparently applies for everyone except Israel and the United Arab Emirates at the moment. Israel is doing to southern Lebanon and to 1.4 million Shia what it did to 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. It's making the land unlivable for them. It's destroying houses, hospitals, bridges, all civilian infrastructure. Its aim is to force an exodus, which in number would be 3 times the size of the Nakba in 1947 and 8. The anger of the Arab world is through the roof, particularly in Egypt and in Jordan, which are the 2 nations that normalized with Israel in the last century. Listen to the nephew of Anwar Sadat, the first Arab leader to address the Knesset in Israel, and what he told Sean. Israel, he says, is drunk on power and does not want to compromise or be integrated into the region. It's an expression I hear very, very often and with much vehemence. Does Greece really want to be allied to that? Is it in Greece's interest to turn itself into the front line of a confrontation with Israel's next target, which is Turkey? Because one thing is clear, Israel will not stop with Iran. Does Greece really want to go down the path of Abu Dhabi? Because when Trump tires of bombing Iran, it will find itself looking down the barrels of 2 angry and much larger neighbors, Saudi Arabia and Iran. Little Sparta looked like a great idea before America and Israel attacked Iran, is looking like a very dodgy idea now. And how would you judge New Byzantium's relationship with a predatory Jewish state? Do you judge the worth of that relationship through its defense contracts, through the Iron Dome it's supplying, or through the daily experience of the Greek school on Mount Zion, whose students are being attacked by settlers every week? It's a good question, and it's one that Sean asks. This is a serious book, a real addition to the bibliography of the region, which is undergoing fundamental violent change. I do recommend it. Thank you very much.
The other recorded, which rippled across the tiny Enusis, is finished. I come back to Enusis because it is often in far-off borderlands like this where geopolitical changes can be felt and contextualized. The same goes for all of Greece, which is a frontier state in NATO and the European Union. In my travels, I was left with the impression that Greece is like likely to be where the United States' commitment to its NATO allies dies hardest. But that is because Greece is a valuable Near Eastern protectorate for a superpower, not because it is part of Europe. For 80 years, Greece was pulled in the direction of the West. Now it's rejoining the East. In a twist from the crisis years, while Greece's commitment to the European Union and NATO is firm, the line which Greece sits on between East and West is vanishing. Greece is a crossroads at a tectonic intersection where great and regional powers are carving out zones of influence. Throughout history, when push came to shove, Greece has always been left outside Russia's zone, whether Tsarist or Soviet. In this new era, Greece will sit on the edge, but not inside, the sphere of influence that a militaristic and unstable Russia is pushing for. The bigger takeaway is that in a multipolar world where borders are no longer sacrosanct, places like Eleusis will become more detached from the West. Eleusis' big neighbor is Turkey, not Russia. This is the worry here. The imbalance between Greece and Turkey in populations and military might means that what happens in Turkey is going to ripple across to islands like Eleusis. That could be good or bad. This island hangs heavy over my identity, as it does all Eleusins. Eleusis commands respect. It is a frontier island whose skies are buzzed often by Turkish jet fighters. If the Turks come here, we will fight, Eleusins like to say. That might sound like an exaggeration, but it's worth asking what the European Union and NATO look like in a decade. As the West fractures and revisionist powers get more comfortable with US indifference, dominating their smaller neighbors. One trend that will gain momentum is Greece's quest for Eastern allies. That is why it turned to Egypt to counter Turkey, and why Israel's influence here is expanding dramatically. At the same time, Greece will become more valuable to Western European countries who looked down on it during the financial crisis. Greece is their front line against migration. What about Eleusis? These momentous changes could bypass it altogether, leaving the old sea captains and young sailing cadets here to bask in their island bliss. Like good Levantines, Eleusins have benefited financially from the wars unleashed in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, profiting from higher shipping rates. The protector of Eleusis is the patron of sailors, St. Nicholas. The soft, baby blue church of Agios Nikolaos is adjacent to the only grocery store on the island, which my dad's great uncle owned. The summers I'm able to come back to this remote island. It has no airport, and the ferry connection is from Chios. I sip Turkish coffee and listen to the Orthodox chanting at midday as it echoes through the hilltop town. Those ancient cries seem louder to my ears on Eleusis than anywhere else in Greece. Of course, I am biased, but here I reflect on the words of Egyptian-born Greek businessman and diplomat Konstantin Lokanaki. To the ear, the basilica and the mosque are closely mingled, and the music being the essence of the soul, this union in melody is perhaps the reason why the Greek feels himself more at home in the Muslim Orient than elsewhere, though here he is surrounded by his enemies of several centuries of conflict. The migration crisis was not the main focus of my travels. So much has been written about it that I did not want to condense Greece's place in the new Near East to migration. I feel that Loukanaki's colorful observation holds a timeless truth about Islam and Orthodox Christianity that has been buried in conversations about migration, but is more relevant now because of the geopolitical changes sweeping the region. Migration is just one symptom of Greece's reabsorption into the Near East, a region which had never really left. People are on the move here. I find the overlooked but consequential trend of middle class and upper middle class people from Turkey, Israel, and the Arab world moving to Athens and to a lesser extent, Thessaloniki, fascinating. I have tried to show how Greece belongs to the Near East because of its culture, history, and religion. I hope we can discuss that tonight.
Can you hear me? Yeah, that's. Before I ask a question, I'll ask a few questions of Sean, but not too many because it's a very distinguished audience, and it's much better really that the audience should ask questions, and I will just guide that. It's a terribly good book. This I wasn't really looking forward. It was a bit of a duty, I thought, to read the book. but it gave me a wonderful insight into the world through the eyes of Greece, and it was a new way of looking at an area we try and write about, and it's full of the most extraordinary, important, and devastating pieces of information which enable you to see the world in a different way. And it does have a recollection of Lawrence Durrell and Patrick Leigh-Fermor, this Byzantine world. Also, I think T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Those are pearls that were his eyes. It's this sense of a past and a present, which leads me to the first question, actually, which is we have this framing of the West versus the barbaric East. This is particularly so in American foreign policy discussions. And reading your book, it's something else, isn't it? I mean, it's not the Huntington thesis.
No.
You're undermining the Huntington thesis in a most, should I say, delicious way.
Well, Greece, the whole point of the book is to kind of examine how Greece really was the country on the front lines of changing. I think it's good. Of changing how we think about the East and the West. You know, in Greece was really the first country, as I said in the book, of Western intervention in the wider Middle East. So it really all started in Greece, right? The Greek Revolution of 1821, it was very much kind of this colonial revolt in a sense, right? Of Greeks kind of fighting against the Ottomans. And they were kind of hailing claim to the Byzantine Empire again, right? The rallying cry of the Greek Revolution was the Romeko will come again, they will reincarnate the Byzantine Empire. And then once the Greeks got their independence from the Ottomans, there was this process of Western state building that took place in Greece. And Greece was very much the country in the Middle East, the first country in the Middle East of Western intervention. It all started in Greece. Britain, Russia, and France dominated the Greek political landscape. And they tried to craft this kingdom on the bones of what is the Hellenic Greece, right? Ancient Greece, which the Enlightenment principles were infused in these kind of ideas, and the British especially and the French, they kind of based their countries on this. However, as I say in the book, right, the Greeks always had more in common with their Eastern neighbors than kind of the Western colonial overlords who were trying to dominate the country. And that's really the key essence of the book. So what I try to do is kind of reframe our understanding of where Greece sits within the wider Middle East, to argue that under the Ottomans especially, the Greeks flourished, of course, right? The Greeks were the bankers, the traders of the Ottoman Empire. They dominated. And for the Greeks, living 400 years under the Ottomans, they had greater freedoms, especially in the early 15th and 16th century, than the Greeks who were living under Catholic Venice and Genoa, these empires. So what I try to do is look through the history of the Byzantine Empire again and talk about how the empire itself was really a continuation of the Ottoman Empire. Robert Byron, the cousin of the great poet Lord Byron, he had a great line in one of his books that he said, and he said basically, the Ottoman Empire was the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople the heart of each, which I think to me really speaks to this continuity between the Greeks and the Ottoman world, the Islamic world. And not only that, Yasser Arafat himself, believe it or not, when he visited Athens in the 1980s, he said that Greece was the bridge between the Arab world and Europe. So I mean, there's a volume of kind of literary work and thinkers who kind of saw the Greeks as this bridge between the two worlds. And one of the reasons that I point to an older generation of travel writers like Durrell and Fermor and David Holden, especially David Holden, because he was schooled, I think, in the ways of the Middle East, which is why he was able to write about Greece so beautifully, because he understood it from the perspective of Greece. But the reason that I lean on these travel writers is that they understood a world before we imposed Western borders and before religion came to dominate where you belong in the Middle East or not, where the West tried to impose an Islamic identity. Oddly enough, it was the West that tried to impose this Islamic identity on the Middle East and then otherize it and exploit it in many ways. And that's something that the war on terror, the horribly defined war on terror, perpetuated. What I say in my book is that era now is ending, and that this multipolar world that we're seeing is returning to another time period in which Greece is reintegrating into its natural homeland, which is the wider Middle East.
Yeah, it's such a profound point, because we've been educated in places like the New York Times and the American policy schools, and much of British foreign policy making has been captured by this, the Judeo-Christian tradition fighting Oriental barbarism, Judeo-Christian, of course, and Plato and Sophocles and all of that is the foundation era of that. And it's one massive misunderstanding, is that embedded in that is in a massive misunderstanding and the future is going to be very different.
Well, I would just say this. It's interesting because, I had a great interview in my book with the former U.S. ambassador to Qatar, Patrick Theros. Patrick he was previously, after he left the U.S. State Department, he was the representative for the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate in the U.S. A brilliant diplomat. He started his career in the early 60s, and he retired for a four-decade career. Brilliant diplomat. And we had an interview, and he told me a great story when he was stationed, I think it was Jordan. And, in the Arab world, there's kind of a running joke on it. It's called Intim and Wayne, right? Where are you from? Everyone asks. And Patrick, the ambassador, he's sitting with a group of Arab diplomats. And they go to him and they say, Patrick, where are you from? And he goes, you know where I'm from. I'm from the US. And they go, no. Where are you really from? He's like, I'm from Michigan. And they go, no. Where are you really from? And he goes, well, I'm from Greece. And they're like, that's why we love you. You're one of us. So there's a lot of anecdotes in the book like that, right? And I learned this, and it's true in the records, until the 1970s, even, the U.S. foreign policy establishment considered Greece part of the Near East. And that's kind of where the title comes from, this Near East. And of course, the Near East is itself a colonial title, right? I mean, it defined the world in terms of its proximity to the old imperial capital of London. No Greek trader or Armenian or Palestinian trader in the early 19th century would say, I'm from the Near East. They would say, I'm from the Levant. So there is kind of a little bit of geographic play there that I have to do to orient, I think, the readers in the West. But it kind of gets to the spirit of the word that I want, the spirit of the world that I want to describe, which is this kind of Near Eastern Levantine identity. And yeah, until the 1970s, even the State Department considered Greece and Cyprus and Turkey part of the Near East, of course. It was the Turkish invasion of Cyprus that kind of provoked this pivot away from it, in which Greece is taken out of the Near East and put into the European basket with Cyprus, and then Turkey is also. But interesting enough, the U.S. foreign policy establishment itself even considered Greece part of it. And even the British, some of the best British diplomats, I think thinkers of the time, they also saw Greece as part of the Middle East. One of the most beautiful quotes that I have from the book is from Lord Curzon, a great old British colonial administrator. And I'd say in the book, Curzon knew a thing or two about borders because he carved up most of them in the Middle East. And it was Curzon, incidentally, who opposed the creation of the State of Israel because he thought it would destabilize the Middle East, which is very interesting. But it was Curzon who said that basically the Mediterranean is not the border between kind of Greece and the Arab world. It's the Sahel region. The Sahel Desert is the border. The Mediterranean is the connector. It's not a border. And I think that really gets to the essence of the Levant and the Near East, whatever you want to call it, Eastern Mediterranean Levant, which was connecting these communities, whether it's Arab, Muslim, Arab Christian, Greek, Armenian, Turkish, what have you.
And yet you say in the book that US influence in the region has risen since October the 7th. Defend that.
Yeah, I think, it was funny. I had a conversation recently with a friend in Washington, and they were asking me, about Israel genocide in Gaza and the war in Iran. And they were saying that, the U.S. is kind of here, and it's the only country that can stop Israel, right? And I said, of course it's true. And they're like, well, that shows kind of U.S. power. And I said, well, it just shows that the U.S. kind of is the main funder of Israel. That's why Russia and China can't stop it. So there's a dichotomy there, right? I mean, the U.S. is the most powerful in the sense that it's the only country really in the Eastern Mediterranean operating. Out of the great powers, the great superpowers of the world, the Russians, the Chinese, they're relatively absent from the Eastern Mediterranean, which I think is interesting. And in the book, one of the topics that came up with a lot of the Greek diplomats and kind of officials that I spoke with was the port of Piraeus. So Piraeus is kind of the main port of Greece. And it was purchased during the Greek financial crisis by Costco, China's shipping company. And there's a lot of hand-wringing in the U.S. and Washington about how China is going to exploit Greece and how it's going to take all the assets from Greece and how this is going to be the main link for Belt and Road Initiative. And of course, what I said is that at the same time that China bought Costco, Greek, American bases in Greece proliferated. So I think there's actually a lot of fear-mongering in the West that tries to pull American foreign policy making into the region by saying, China is here, Russia is here. Of course, we've seen Russia decimated in Syria, right? Kind of the rise of Sharad's government is really, backed by the Gulf states, by Turkey, who are all U.S. allies in a sense. So in a sense, in the Eastern Mediterranean, I think what we're seeing is a region in which the U.S. is the dominant power, and it's all the United States allies, in a sense, all kind of under its blanket who are competing with each other as the U.S. kind of approaches hands off. So you have this rivalry between Israel and Turkey, obviously in Syria. You have this rivalry between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. You have rivalry in Libya. And all these countries are, they're all tied to the U.S. in a sense, right? But the U.S. is pretty hands off. And you kind of see this multipolar order emerging in the Eastern Mediterranean amongst all of the United States allies. You don't see real competition between the U.S. and China, for example, in Greece. I mean, it's laughable to consider that China is dominating Greece.
And then you say that one of the wonderful pieces of information is that the Russian Orthodox Church in Jerusalem is personally supervised by Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. I spent a few weeks in Jerusalem for the book, meeting with a lot of the Greek Orthodox clergy and a lot of Palestinian Christians in the Old City and a lot of Greeks in the Old City. And the story of kind of Russian influence in Jerusalem is it's a fascinating story. Russia, of course, was always competing with the Russian Orthodox Church was always competing with the Greek Orthodox Church in the Levant. In fact, the Russian society, kind of the Russian Near East society, it was accused back in 2018 or so, oddly enough, of funneling funds to North Macedonian separatist groups who oppose North Macedonia's interest into NATO, a really obscure kind of feud that didn't get a lot of coverage in the West. But this group, which is a Russian kind of Near Eastern group, it's the same group that was lobbying in the early 19th century kind of for greater Russian influence in Jerusalem. So kind of there's this centuries-long battle that Russia's always had to try to kind of get a foothold in Jerusalem. Putin, what he's trying to do in Jerusalem, which is a fascinating trend, we can talk about it more if people are interested, but he's trying to reclaim the church properties. And one of the things that I found out when I was in Jerusalem, kind of doing my reporting there, is the influence that Russia has through the influx of tens of thousands of Russian-speaking migrants who claim kind of Jewish descent, but are in fact Orthodox Christians. And they're basically settlers to Israel. And I met one Ukrainian diplomat actually when I was in Tel Aviv. And I was talking to him about a year and a half ago, this was, and we were chatting. And I said, well, how's your work going? And he goes, my work is madness. And he goes, I'm trying to track down tens of thousands of Ukrainians who are here illegally. And I'm like, are they all Jewish? He goes, no, they're celebrating Orthodox Easter. He goes, but they all came during the war. I'm trying to track them down. So this is a Ukrainian diplomat. And he said somebody in Ukraine got very rich issuing a lot of visas to make Israeli settlers.
Yes, you said there are Israeli diplomats in Moscow making fortunes, creating.
Yes, exactly. Yes, Israeli diplomats making fortunes. Yeah, creating Jewish settlers. Yes, who are going to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in East Jerusalem on Easter. In fact, I was there for Greek Easter last year, and I went with my fiance who's Greek and some Greek friends, and I think we were out of about 200 people. We were probably the only 5 people speaking Greek. Everyone else was speaking Russian.
You suggest, in fact, you say that the future of the Greek Orthodox Church is to become the Russian Orthodox Church.
In a sense, yes, and it's something that the church is very aware of. A lot of the clergy is aware of, and it's due to 2 things. First is the persecution of Palestinian Christians by Israel. Palestinian Christians are often they're very well educated. They're very mobile. Because they're Christian in the West, it's easier for them to get visas, right, and to get sponsored. So unfortunately, instead of enduring the occupation, many Palestinian Christians decide to flee. So the relative number of Palestinian Christians in East Jerusalem, especially, and is decreasing tremendously, which I know you know, Peter, because you traveled there as well. The Greek community, which was there, and which numbered upwards of 10,000, maybe up to 20,000 Greeks in Jerusalem before the creation of the state of Israel, has now shrunk to a sad shell of its former self. It's barely 100 people. So what I say is that basically you have this very tenuous situation for the Greek Orthodox Church, where the Palestinian Christians are leaving and they're under persecution. The Greeks have all but left. Very few people want to celebrate the Greek presence in East Jerusalem. And you have kind of this influx of what is effectively Russian settlers to Israel, claiming to be Jewish, making Aliyah, who are going to the Orthodox Church. In Bethlehem, you see them. So there's this demographic change that's being wrought on the church, and it's something that the Greek clergy especially is very aware of, and they're nervous about.
And then the consequences of that, in order to survive, the Greek Orthodox Church, which owns 30% of Jerusalem, and it also owns the land where the Knesset is and so on. But it has to go into really, in order to survive, it involves a series of most unappetizing deals with the Israeli state, property developers, and so on.
Very unappetizing. The Greek church is, on one hand, it's a victim of the Israeli settler movement, especially in occupied East Jerusalem. At the same time, the church often plays a double game. And I have a quote, actually, I think, from one priest in the book who says that, in fact. Actually, no, it was an Israeli lawyer who we both know, Danny Seideman.
Oh, Danny, yeah.
Yeah, the great Danny Seideman, who told me that the Orthodox Church plays a double game in a sense, because there's this balance, right? Very Levantine, very Byzantine in a sense, in which they're involved in a lot of property sales to the settler movement. And at the same time, they're under threat from the settler movement. So it's a very delicate dance that's going on, and it's very dangerous.
And of course, it's the patriarch is Greek and sort of chosen by the Israeli government.
Well, so the patriarchy is an interesting one, because basically you have the Greek patriarch. Three people have to agree. Three groups have to agree. Actually, really four. The Jordanians have to agree, because of course they're the custodians of the Christian and Muslim holy sites. The Israeli government has a veto. The Palestinian Authority has a veto, and of course Greece has some influence on the say. So it's kind of this mixing and mingling of interest here. The issue of the Greek patriarchate, obviously, it's a long-standing issue, kind of that, this tension between the Palestinian Christian community and the Greek community, because most of the clergy is in fact Greek, right? And the flock is still Palestinian, although it's becoming more Russian from the settler movement. But most of the flock is the religious flock is Palestinian. Most of the clergy is Greek. What I do, kind of unpacking this debate about kind of why that exists, I try to take a longer term view, and I try to ask about why there are these national views to begin with within the church, right? Because of course, before the Ottomans were in Jerusalem, you had the Byzantines in Jerusalem. And under the Byzantine Empire, which is very much a cosmopolitan empire as well, like the Ottoman Empire, it was Muslim, it was Christian, there was Arabs, there were Greeks, there were Armenians, there were Jews. It's a very cosmopolitan empire, like the Ottomans. But basically, you had everyone who was Christian in the Byzantine Empire. They didn't consider themselves, of course, Greek. They considered themselves Orthodox Christian, or the descendants of the Eastern Roman Empire, and they called themselves Rome, right? When the Ottomans kind of conquered Constantinople, they spread their empire across the wasteland of the Byzantine Empire. They considered everyone in their community Rome, right? And you had the Millet system, which kind of governed the relationship between all these communities. So for 3 centuries, there was no Greek Orthodox Church, Bulgarian Orthodox Church, Serbian Orthodox Church. Everyone was just Eastern Christian, right? And it was really Western colonialism that kind of led to this identity of national churches, right? And the Ottomans, what they did in the late 19th century was create these churches to appease the nationalist aspirations of other communities, right? That's why the Bulgarian Orthodox Church was created. That's why the Serbian Orthodox Church was created. That's why you had all these kind of national churches created. But before that, you had the Millet system governing the Ottoman Empire, right? And no one considered themselves, I'm a Greek, I'm a Palestinian, I'm Jewish. There was a Christian Millet system, and everyone under there was kind of governed them the same Millet. So in a sense, the national debate over the churches kind of stems from Western colonialism, in a sense, trying to propagate the division and the carve-up of the Ottoman Empire.
This takes us, I think, to this very delicate subject, very important subject, which David Hearst talked about, which is the relationship between Greece and Israel, framed partly by a mutual antipathy to Turkey.
Yeah.
But by other factors as well. And so you can tell, your book contains this, I didn't know this, that Israeli troops trained in Greek Cyprus ahead of the invasion of Lebanon.
Yes, yeah.
Now,
internationally recognized Cyprus, I should add. They're internationally recognized.
Yeah. And you have this Israeli Greek alliance. Let me ask you a difficult question. If we say that the United States is collaborators in the genocide and that Britain is complicit in the genocide, is Greece complicit in the genocide?
What I try to do with the Greek-Israeli relationship, I try to look at it through 3 lenses, and I want to go back to the historical aspect of the relationship because it's fascinating. I don't think we can forget the history. Yeah. Interestingly, Greece was the only European country that voted against the UN partition plan for Palestine, joining the Arab world, right? I think a lot of people forget that. There was always this deep solidarity between the Greeks and the Palestinians. Interestingly enough, on both the left and on the right, which I think a lot of people forget. On the right, because of the Orthodox Church and kind of because of this view of Greek Orthodoxy in Byzantium, and then on the left, out of solidarity against colonialism. So you had kind of this strong movement in support of the Palestinians. There was also a business side to the Greek calculus, which is fascinating, I think. Onassis, interestingly enough, in the late 1940s, 1950s, Onassis was trying to cut a oil deal with the Saudi Arabians. I have this in the book, and it's an anecdote worth telling. It's very funny. So Onassis is traveling in the Middle East at the time. Onassis, by the way, he was born in Izmir, in Smyrna. So he's a Turkish speaker and a Greek speaker. He's very much a man of the Levant, and someone to study to understand the Levant today. But anyway, so Onassis is traveling in the Middle East. He's trying to cut a deal with the Saudis to transport the oil in the post-war era because there's a lot of money to be made, right? And Onassis takes out a position in support of the Palestinians. The CIA at the time, an American journalist dug this up, accused Onassis of being a Zionist. So there's this great line when Onassis arrives in Beirut, I think it's in 1950, 1951, and Onassis goes, everyone in Beirut's calling him a Zionist, and Onassis goes, in the West, everyone calls me an anti-Zionist. And he goes, what's going on here? So the CIA was trying to sabotage him, and they succeeded actually in killing his oil deal with the Saudis, which is a fascinating story. But even up until the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, you had this deep solidarity between the Greeks and the Palestinians. And I want to say that even in Jerusalem today, I spent about a month in Jerusalem, the level of solidarity between Muslim and Christian Palestinians with Greece, it's amazing. And one of the things that the reason this exists, I often say, is that, the Arab world wants Greece to be part of the Middle East. And they recognize that sometimes the Greeks are a little skeptical of it, because of this kind of Westernization drive, right? But the Arab world, both Muslim and Christian, very much kind of identifies Greece as part of the neighborhood. But anyway, the Greek-Israeli relationship, interestingly enough, it started around 2010, and it was George Papandreou, the son of Andreas Papandreou, who was the, very close to the Palestinian resistance, actually, interestingly enough. George Papandreou had a meeting with Netanyahu in 2010. In all places, it was brokered by the Russians. It wasn't even brokered by the Americans. So they had this meeting in Moscow. And from there, 2010 is a very important date, right? Because you have Mavi Marmara incident, right? When you have this deadly Israeli attack on the Palestinian, on the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, the killing of these activists by the Israeli government. Then you have Erdogan who closes in Turkey. He closes Turkish airspace to the Israelis. And this presents a problem for Israel, obviously, right? Because Israel is a small country, and it's boxed in by countries that whose populations don't like the peace treaty that their governments under Western pressure signed with Israel, effectively, right, on Egypt and Jordan. So Israel needs a place to train its air force. Now Turkey's closed its airspace to Israel, and what happens? The Israelis turn to the Greeks to train. And you have this kind of geopolitical chess game that goes on where the Greeks abandon kind of their bid to keep Israel at a distance because they see the relationship between Turkey and Israel breaking down. Interestingly enough, a lot of people don't know this also. It was Turkey, one of the first Muslim majority countries that recognized Israel, established a relationship with it. And it was the secular Turkish military, a government in the 1980s and the 1990s that helped the Israeli government helped the Turkish secular military dictatorship defeat an Armenian genocide bill in Washington. It was the Israeli lobby that helped defeat that Armenian genocide bill in Washington. So you had kind of this union between the Turkish nationalists and the Zionists working against Christian interests actually in Washington, which is fascinating. But 2010 comes around, right? Tensions between Greece and Israel and Turkey are rising. And Greece obviously sees an opportunity to kind of think the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Greece kind of moves towards Israel. Of course, under both the left and the right now in Greece, we've seen the relationship grow, right? So under Tsipras, who was kind of this left-wing, he entered office as kind of this left-wing radical. He moves very close to the Americans, and he builds on the relationship with Israel, which is fascinating. He makes a tremendous pivot, which surprised a lot of people and his supporters. The government of Mitsotakis continues that relationship, right? What I try and do in the book is look at it through three perspectives now. So I say, 5 years ago, if you had asked Greeks, they would have said that the question at the time for them on the value and the utility of the relationship with Israel would have been, will Israel protect us if we get into a shooting war with the Turks? Now, what I've noticed, though, is a change. And this speaks to the kind of Israeli aggression that we're seeing in the region, and especially kind of the Israeli belligerence and the attacks on Lebanon, the carving out of territory in Syria, right? Israel's attempt to break Syria kind of into little fiefdoms, and kind of this real rivalry that we're seeing where Israel's extremely isolated in the region, even amongst very pro-U.S. Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, right, that have called Israel's war on Gaza a genocide, right? So Israel's very isolated. And what Greeks ask themselves, many Greeks are starting to ask themselves, is that not will Israel rescue us if we get into a shooting match with Turkey, but will Israel drag us into a shooting match with Turkey? So I think that does say something about the relationship and where Israel is today, that there is kind of a pivot to the thinking here. And I think that in the coming years, we're going to see that. One of the things that I try to say in the book, and again, this kind of gets back to why I called the book, the Return of the Near East. In the post-war era, the Eastern Mediterranean, really, it was an American lake, right? As I say, right, with the Marshall Plan and kind of Greece and Turkey's acceptance into Nato, the Americans beat the British Empire in its wildest dreams of controlling the Eastern Mediterranean, right? And the gap between East and West kind of vanished because both Greece and Turkey were in NATO. The region was very quiet, and you had kind of this separation between what is East and what is West. The breakdown in this kind of return to a multipolar world is kind of bringing this wider Eastern Mediterranean back, right? And Greece is moving closer to these countries. One of the things that I think is important, though, to keep in mind is that this American lake, one thing that it did do, it was keep Greece and Turkey from fighting with each other. And in the book, one of the things that I try to say is that I don't think Turkey would go to war willingly with Greece, and Greece certainly wouldn't go to war willingly with Turkey. The closest they came to a conflict was in 1996, the India-Kardak incident. They had this kind of spat over an uninhabited island. And at the time, it was the Clinton administration, which kind of came in and separated the two countries, right? Because they were both its NATO allies. Now, what you see, and this is what I heard in my conversations, countless conversations in the region, is that America is less interested in NATO. And you have the entrance of a third party, Israel, which has an interest, potentially, likely, in breaking NATO. So the question now that's being asked is, do the Israelis, as a third party, have an interest in kind of perpetuating a war between the Greeks and the Turks in order to break NATO? And I think that's the question that's going to define the Eastern Mediterranean in the coming years, actually. And as I say in the book, the weakest link for NATO, it's not the Baltic states, it's actually the Eastern Mediterranean, potentially, because of Israel's interest in breaking NATO, given its belligerence and its expansionist policies.
Yeah, that's just one of the. This is it's an amazing book. Actually, it's full of bits of information, like insights like this. For instance, Netanyahu was the leading advocate in Washington for Greece for many years through AIPAC, and it's full of this kind of stuff which I hadn't really understood. But I there's so much more to ask, but there's such a distinguished audience. Would anybody like to ask questions? Because I'm sure somebody would. Yes, sir. Daniel.
Hi. It's on.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, you can hear me. Great. Sean, I'm so sorry I haven't bought your book yet. It sounds fantastic. I wanted, we've spoken a bit in the past, you and I, about population exchanges in the early 1920s between Turkey and Greece, and the trauma of them when sort of about 2 million people were traded between the two countries, based on their religion. And I wondered if you felt that there could be a line drawn between the decision to deport people and partition the Near East in that way, and Israel in 1948 and the partition of India in 1947.
I think the line is very clear. I mean, it was the carve up, right, of these the cosmopolitan multicultural Ottoman Empire, which was a continuation, as I say in the book, of the Byzantine Empire, and kind of this rise of nationalism and Zionism, really, right, in occupied Palestine. And the population exchange in 1923, it was the first one. And this is the thing, not to get on the sidetrack, but I do want to say this is why everyone should read the book, even if you don't like Greece. Because as I say in the book, you will love Greece when you finish the book. But if you're interested in the Middle East, what you see, and I say this throughout the book, and there are many cases of it, Greece is really the first country in the wider Middle East where you see a lot of the trends like this, right? Like the partition of between Pakistan and India, like the Zionist movement and the occupation of Palestine. A lot of the movements that you see in the wider Middle East, they all start first in Greece. And the Treaty of Lausanne, the population exchange, was really the first time when you saw this multicultural, cosmopolitan Ottoman Empire, which was a precursor to the Byzantine Empire, breaking up, right? Interestingly enough, and I know, and I did a beautiful piece for Middle East Eye, and I turned that into a chapter in my book, actually, about my travels in Western Thrace, in Greece. And I say, everywhere I've traveled in the Levant, whether it's in Lebanon or Egypt or Turkey, it is actually Greek Western Thrace, which has best preserved the Mlet system of everywhere I've traveled. And you have this coexistence. It was a very fragile coexistence, and there was a very dark history to it, kind of, which we can get into in the kind of the persecution of the Greek minority in Istanbul, and then of course the persecution of the Muslim minority in Western Thrace. But it is Greek Western Thrace which has best preserved the Mlet system, and you have this coexistence between the Christian and the Muslim communities. And oddly enough, I say this is something that's going to surprise, I think, people who read the chapter on Western Thrace. It'll surprise many people on the left and quite a few people on the right. Because what I say is that you have this conservative region, small c conservative, right, without the political dynamics of it. But you have conservatism and cosmopolitanism existing in Western Thrace, kind of with these communities and this mutual respect, which is very beautiful. And nowhere I've traveled in the Eastern Mediterranean, even in Lebanon, have I seen kind of the Mlet system actually preserved as well as I have in Western Thrace, which is fascinating. So it's a region that everyone should go to, actually. It's really a beautiful multicultural cosmopolitan region. But yes, in general, yes, I think that the trends that you're saying, very much it goes back to the Treaty of Lausanne, which was the first kind of big carve up of the former Ottoman Empire. And again, that's just one of the hallmarks. You kind of gave me another one to talk about, Daniel, because there are two hallmarks that I say that everyone should watch for Greece. One is kind of this Western intervention, right? That Greece was the first country, as I said in the beginning, of Western intervention in the wider Middle East. It was France, Britain, and Russia that intervened in the Greek War of Independence, right? And kind of created this kingdom run by a Bavarian king, right, as a proxy for their interest in many ways, exploiting the Greek people. And then also, Greece was the first country, which we shouldn't forget talking about, of Western intervention in the global South, right? The Truman Doctrine, kind of the US war and the domino theory that led to so many conflicts in the global South with such disasters in Vietnam and South America. The first point on it came in Greece, and it was the US intervention in the Greek Civil War. That is another point of Western intervention. So Greece, in many ways, is a country of firsts in the wider Middle East. So to understand the wider region, you can look to Greece and you can get a lot of lessons from it, whether it's the Treaty of Lausanne and the state-sanctioned ethnic cleansing that took place, whether it's Western intervention in the Greek War of Independence, or 1947, the U.S. intervention in the Greek Civil War. So very much so, I think yes.
Another question? You have a question down here?
My name is Faisal Nagel from Serd Media Group, Kuwait. Very interesting points that you've discussed. My question is, democracy historically has been founded in ancient Athens. With that information in mind, isn't it easier to integrate with Europe, regardless of how weak those democratic institutions have become today? It's still much stronger than how it is on the other side of the Middle East. So isn't that more, let's say, easier to integrate? Isn't that more organic to integrate into the West rather than the East?
Well, I think one of the things that I try to say in the book is that actually in this kind of world that we're seeing, in which democracy in the West looks pretty shaky right now, I think we can say, in populism. So I don't think the question is integration into the West. I think now the question is, what does Western democracy look like with the rise of the far right and populism on this side? And one of the things I say in the book actually is that because Greece belongs to the Near East, it's been more immune from populism actually, because it's part of the wider Middle East. Because the values of religion and family are anchoring things that Greece has, which I think in many Western European societies we're seeing fray. Whereas in Greece, you see this coexistence, and you see the family unit very important in Greece. You see religion very important in Greece. These are things that transcend kind of Western nation states. One of the things I try to say in the book also is that kind of Greece, and why I call it the rise of Greece. Obviously Greece suffered a horrible financial crisis a decade ago, right? And a lot of Greek friends of mine kind of say, Sean, you're writing about the rise of Greece, but Greece is, the middle class was hollowed out in Greece, and I talk about this in the book, right? And the real suffering of Greek people. And I say that one of the things I try to do is think beyond nation states, because in this world that we're seeing today, right, in this multipolar world, it's where you are that matters, and it's your connections that matter, it's your family that matters, it's how you integrate with your neighbors that matter. And I say the Greek people themselves, right, are very, very well placed to thrive in a more multipolar world. Not because they're part of the West, because they're part of the East, because they have these Eastern values that are more endearing in many ways than what we're seeing in the West, actually. So yeah, that's how I think.
Yes, sir, at the back.
I'm interested in hearing what your view is on Greece's role in the Balkans, because Greece had quite close relationships with Serbia during the wars of Yugoslav succession. Then Greek banks invested heavily across the Balkans after the fall of communism, and then many of them had to pull out after the Greek financial crisis, and their assets were snapped up often by Western European banks. You may or may not touch on this. I'm looking forward to buying and reading the book. What do you see as Greece's role there, and is this something you touch on?
It is, I think the chapter that touches on it the most is probably the chapter that I have on Thessaloniki, obviously, Salonika. It was in many ways, and there's some history to it, I think that we have to kind of to dig down to, but Salonika in Ottoman times and Thessaloniki, it was called the Jerusalem of the Balkans at one point in time. And it was really the entrepot of the wider region during the Ottoman Empire. And that's because Thessaloniki at that time, it wasn't disconnected from its hinterlands, which were, modern day Bulgaria, modern day Serbia, North Macedonia, of these countries. So Thessaloniki is one of these cities that thrived in the Ottoman Empire in a cosmopolitan region. When the Greek army came into Thessaloniki in 1912, Greeks were, demographically speaking, which is interesting, they were kind of third on the rung. Thessaloniki was a Jewish city, actually. It was Ladino-speaking Jewish. Next, beneath that kind of metric within the percentage of the population, it was Muslim citizens, and then Greek Christians. So Thessaloniki was a cosmopolitan city, and it was really kind of the cradle of the Balkans. So it's a city where I address this. And I say actually that Thessaloniki's renaissance, in a sense, that we're seeing in these last 10 to 15 years under the mayor Yannis Boutaris. I interviewed him in my book before he passed away. He was a fantastic mayor. He had a great vision to kind of promote Thessaloniki's Ottoman identity and its multicultural identity. He rebuilt some of the mosques, and he opened one of the mosques in Thessaloniki for call to prayer. Actually, he was the first mayor that did that. He created green space. He promoted these Ottoman monuments and this historic. He really made it a beacon for tourism from Turkey and from the Balkans. So in many ways, for tourism from Turkey and from the Balkans. So in many ways, I say that kind of the European Union and kind of the entrance and the ease of mobility again that we're seeing is one of the reasons why Thessaloniki has kind of reemerged in a sense as this local entropole for the Balkans. So I think, I try to address it again. I try to address many of these questions through cities, because the Eastern Mediterranean is very much, it's a story of cities, right? The great historian Fernand Braudel, he said that the rise of to understand the history of the Eastern Mediterranean, it's often the rise of one city over another city. And Thessaloniki very much, Salonika was very much a city that thrived on this cosmopolitan Balkan identity. And in a sense, I say in this multipolar world that we're seeing, kind of the boom in Thessaloniki. If you can go to Thessaloniki today and you can see the cafes bustling, and you can see tourists from Turkey, from Bulgaria, really a very cosmopolitan kind of this localized city. It's very much due to kind of this return of this multipolar world.
Yes. People put their hand up a bit more.
Hi, Sean. Well done on the book. I'm very excited to read it. Got my copy. And I could see, leading up to this event, you were doing loads of press elsewhere as well. And you met with the Greek Prime Minister as well. And I hear that he's a fan of the book. Off the basis of what you've just written, if you were in his shoes now, what does Greece returning to the Near East look like? What would you do?
I think one of the things that Greece has to try to do, and I say this in the book, and there are two sides. There's the geopolitical and there's the economic side to this, right? One of the things that we're seeing is that the U.S. retreat and the United States failures actually in the wider Middle East create opportunities for countries like Greece, kind of small and nimble countries. Because in a post-American world, right, if you're Qatar or UAE or even Saudi Arabia or any of the countries, Kuwait, you're looking for allies and you're looking kind of to diversify your relationships. You're looking for new supply lines. You're looking for new investments. So in many ways, Greece was a protectorate of the U.S. during the Cold War, and it was a protectorate of the West. But this post-war era could actually create opportunities for Greece, for investment and for trade and for new relationships, especially in the Gulf states. We're seeing a little bit of that, but we can see more of it, I think. And that's one thing that I think that Greece needs to tap into, and is to tap into these countries that are trying to find their independence in this post-American order. It's funny. There's a great line from a historian that I cited in the book, and they said that in many ways, the rise of the Ottoman Empire for Greek traders in the Balkan hinterlands, it really came with the ascent of the Ottoman Empire. When the Byzantine Empire was crumbling, the Greek and Armenian traders were losing out to the Venetians and to the Genovese. And the rise of the Ottoman Empire was really a victory, actually, for Greek traders in cities like Yanina and Thessaloniki. And in a sense, in the post-American world, I think we see opportunities for Greece and for Greeks that they can thrive. And this is hard, I think, to convince some Greeks, because people have been so kind of beaten into them that you're part of the West, you have to join the West. That is where your safety net is. But the opportunities that we're seeing today are actually rising in the East. So economically speaking, I think Greece has a lot of opportunities in the Gulf states that can be built on, and a lot of cross synergies. Politically speaking, and security-wise, obviously, as I said in the passage that I read, kind of there's this deep historic rivalry with Turkey, right, which transcends, it goes back 200 years, and it transcends even the post-American order. And one of the things I say in the book is that, and we're seeing this, Greece needs to have a relationship with Turkey that is not dependent on its relationship with the U.S., let alone with Israel, because that's just a dangerous relationship. The Israelis will drag the Greeks into a war with the Turks. They won't help them. But even for the U.S., right, the Greeks can't rely on America. The Greeks have to have a good dialogue with Turkey. And actually, the Greek Prime Minister he's had, I think, several meetings with Erdogan. Interestingly enough, he gets a lot of pressure on kind of the far right to not engage in those meetings. but the prime minister, he's actually tried to kind of cultivate Erdogan more recently, which is interesting, and I think that's a little telling about the relationship. So I think Greece needs to have a relationship with Turkey that exists kind of outside the sphere of the U.S., right, as neighbors. And you see this, by the way. One of the things in the book, as I said, I'm from this island called Eleusis, which is right on the Turkish coast, and it's Turkish tourists who power the tourism economies of Greece's Eastern Aegean islands. Chios, Samos, Lesbos. These countries are really powered by Turkish tourists. So there's these economic links again that transcend nation states. And those are the kind of things that Greece needs to recognize, right? These relationships they have to build kind of within their community in this new Near East.
Yes, Adam.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, what do you think of Cyprus's role in all this? Especially talking about how potential efforts by Israel to break NATO by pitting Greece and Turkey against each other. And also, just as you see Greece returning to the Near East, do you see that happening in Cyprus as well, as a country where Greece, Turkey, and Israel have influence over?
Yeah, I get a lot of questions on Cyprus, and I have the best answer that I have is that Cyprus is not in the book because it deserves its own book, honestly. And that's not my second book. I'm not writing about Cyprus for a second book, but Cyprus really deserves its own book. In many ways, kind of, yeah, Cyprus is this kind of other node, right, in the Greek kind of Israeli relationship that we've discussed. And of course, as I said, right, in 1974, when Greece entered kind of in the State Department realm, when Greece joined Europe, that was Greece and Cyprus and Turkey were all taken out of the Near East basket for the State Department together because of Turkey's invasion of Cyprus. But Cyprus really deserves its own book. So yeah, I don't discuss Cyprus in the book, and I didn't go to Cyprus.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we know each other. All right, so a short story, a short question. I mean, you have a long perspective in your book. I mean, you talk about New Byzantines. You try to bring historical perspective. I wouldn't go as far as the ancient Greeks and modern democracy, but Byzantine back. I'm wondering if you, in your interviews or when you go around Greece, do you find politicians ready to see, or technocrats even, ready to see changing times, or is everyone, as in the UK, in a sort of autopilot? Like, we're so used to the institutions that we've worked with that we don't recognize change anymore.
Yeah, so one of the things that I try to do in the book is I try to find people who speak towards these changes and who I think are on the vanguard of recognizing them. I mentioned one of them, Yanis Boutaris, the former mayor of Thessaloniki, who is a brilliant mayor, and he was voted by some metrics, I don't know the poll, but like the best mayor in the world at one point in time. And he was a guy that did a lot to promote kind of the cosmopolitan nature of Thessaloniki. And again, I said he opened a mosque for prayer. He really promoted tourism. He's a great mayor. David, in his remarks, he mentioned another kind of New Byzantine, Anna Misserian, who owns this beautiful hotel in Kavala, which I was lucky enough to visit. And she's quite a character, this lady. She renovated the, which was built by Muhammad Ali Pasha, the founder of the modern state of Egypt, basically. And she's very, flamboyant kind of lady. I think when I was there, she was converting the hotel it had like 25 rooms at the time, and she was making it into 10 rooms, and she was going to increase the price to 2,000 euros a night, believe it or not. And the Greek prime minister actually brought that up with me, and he said he's going to try and get her to lower the price. So we'll see if that happens, because people should go to this hotel. It's a beautiful hotel. She's another person, right, that kind of promotes this, that promoted this vision of a Near East, right? And she was telling Mika that basically in her mind, Kavala, which technically kind of Greece doesn't see it as part of Western Thrace, or Thrace is a region which extends across Bulgaria and Turkey, but she said Kavala really belongs to Thrace, which of course is a very cosmopolitan region because a third of Western Thrace's inhabitants are Muslim Greek citizens. And there's this cosmopolitan coexistence. So she's another kind of New Byzantine in the book. I met some very great good guys in Yanina, which is a city right on the border with Albania. It was the home to another Muhammad Ali Pasha. There were a few of them in the Ottoman Empire. This Muhammad Ali Pasha, interestingly enough, he was kind of an Ottoman ruler at the time in Yanina, right on the border with Albania, And when the Greek Revolution started, some of the revolutionaries actually wanted this guy to be their president, for lack of a better word. So yeah, there was some finagling there before the Sultan killed him, because Muhammad Ali Pasha was a feisty guy and he liked his independence, so the Sultan got rid of him. But some of the Greek revolutionaries wanted this Pasha to be their leader. But anyway, in Yanina today, you have kind of a tech scene and a startup scene. So I interviewed a lot of young guys who have actually moved there because it's cheaper than Athens, and they love the city, and they kind of like this Ottoman and this historical kind of vibe in Yanina. And I tried to interview guys like this. Like I tried to kind of find these people who kind of speak to this cosmopolitanism in all these places. And they're all over if you know where to look, I think, in the region. So yeah, there's a lot of people on the ground, not just policymakers. I say the better diplomats understand this very well, actually. And there are some very good diplomats who do understand this. But also just regular people, right, who are changing their lives, which to me is more interesting, right? How people try to organize their lives in this new order and how they try to form their families and try to get ahead and carve out a niche for themselves. That's way more interesting in some ways than what some diplomat or analyst at the desk thinks, right? To me, at least, and that's kind of what I try to communicate in the book.
That's at the back.
Thank you. Sean, you mentioned Rum or Rome previously when you were up on stage. Curious to understand, you've been to Beirut, you've been to Lebanon. New Byzantium or the New Byzantines, there's clusters of communities throughout the Middle East, especially Arab Christian communities that identify strongly with their Rum or Rome background. Have you had a chance ever to speak to some of these communities in Beirut, in Syria, that kind of hold that dual identity? The reason I'm asking is a lot of them have appealed recently that have come under threat in the Middle East to the Greek government, claiming that, hey, you're leaving us here stranded, especially through some communities in Syria. I'm curious to understand if you've delved a little deeper into those communities and their identity as Rum or Rome.
Yeah, I have. And there'll be a foreword actually coming out as the paperback edition of the book by a gentleman who identifies as one from Lebanon. So I can't say his name yet, but he's a very prominent guy who identifies as one. So I've had a long chat about it. And in Beirut, I didn't go to Lebanon for the book, but I've been to Lebanon 3 times. And I've met a lot of, especially Greek Orthodox Christians who kind of identify as Rum. In the book, I did interview one Greek from Damascus, believe it or not, who was, I don't think he identified as a Rum per se. His family had come to Damascus in the 1860s, right after the massacre. There's a massacre in Damascus in the 1860s. His family had come from, I think it was from Constantinople. But the biggest Rum community that I interviewed in the book, it was the Rum community of Istanbul, of Constantinople. And they still do identify as Rum. If you ask a Greek of Constantinople today, how do they see themselves? They'll call themselves Rum Christian, which is right, the descendants of the Eastern Roman Empire. And they're a fascinating community, brilliant, a lot of drama there, but also a lot of fascinating conversations. And it's interesting. One of the things that I noted in the book, I traveled the 3 great cities of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Levant, where the Greeks were high in number: Cairo, Jerusalem, and Istanbul. And I said, in all of my travels in Egypt, right, which is a predominantly Muslim majority country, the Greeks felt, they felt very free, and the Greek club there is celebrated in downtown Cairo. And it's been like this for decades, right? Whichever the government there was in Cairo, it was celebrated. And if you go to Cairo, you have to go to the Greek club. It's fantastic. You'll have great Greek mezze and ouzo, and a really fun community there. The community in Istanbul, which is about 2,000 people today, it was thriving also. They have cultural centers, they have great schools there for the Greek community, and actually they are experiencing a renaissance of sorts, actually under the government of Erdogan, right? Which I think surprises a lot of people, especially in the West. It's Erdogan who's actually kind of been the best for the Muslim community, the Greek Christian community in Istanbul. The Greek community of Jerusalem, under the Israeli occupation, East Jerusalem, is the one that has been the most persecuted, and the one in which, of course, most of the Greeks had left after the 1967 war, but there was no spark and no flavor to celebrate this historic cosmopolitan community in Jerusalem, which I found very striking, right? In Istanbul, I could go to any Greek, I could find a Greek community center to go to interview people, networks of Greeks here. In Cairo, I could find it. And yet in Jerusalem, in occupied East Jerusalem, I couldn't find anything, which I think is very telling. And as I think Peter noted that the seminary school in East Jerusalem is under attack from settlers. which is a great example. There's this beautiful, we should talk a little bit about the seminary school, because it's a beautiful school. It was built in the early 1900s. And it was originally intended to be a seminary school for students to kind of go into train in East Jerusalem. I think in the last 50 years, basically they converted it into a high school, actually. So any Greek can go there and study for free. It's paid for by the Patriarchate. And it's a sprawling, beautiful building. It's gorgeous. It's under attack from settlers. Literally, the week before I went, it was attacked by settlers. And the number of students.
Where is it exactly?
In East Jerusalem, Mount Zion.
Mount Zion.
Yeah. You'll see it. There's a Greek flag fluttering there. It's beautiful, beautiful architecture. Sounds
like we should write about this.
We could.
Yes.
Yeah, good idea. But it's a beautiful school. It's attacked by settlers, and the number of students in this school, which could easily house 100 people, it's 10. And I asked one of the priests who showed me around, and I said, why? And he said, there's two reasons. He goes, one is obviously it's very hard to get parents, to convince parents in Greece, even parents who are, strapped for cash to educate their kids, to send their kids to a school where the settlers are attacking, and no one wants to send their kids here to go to school. And the other reason is the Israeli government doesn't issue them enough visas for the students, actually. So this priest was trying to kind of get more visas issued for kids to come and study there. And it's a beautiful school. And I said it's an asset that, you would think, oddly enough, in this Greek-Israeli relationship, it would be the prime thing to promote, right? You would think that would be kind of, as a diplomat, that you would want to promote that school. But clearly Israel doesn't see kind of promoting that multiculturalism and that identity, that Christian identity. They don't see that as a value, which really struck with me. And one of the saddest places that I visited, actually, was that seminary school. Of course, the Greek club in Cairo, I said it was bustling, and the Greek community of Istanbul is thriving, actually, and they're a fascinating, fun community.
By the way, when I was in Jerusalem, actually, St. George's School and all the Christian schools in East Jerusalem are under attack, not by settlers particularly, but because the Israeli government isn't allowing in bank anymore. And they really are struggling to get teachers. And it's St. George's, for instance, where Edward Said went to school, and it's not far off facing the danger of closure. So it's part of a wider problem. Any more? One more question.
I think it's wonderful. I'll just make a sort of a mildly countervailing point. It seems to me that, one of the reasons why Greece is attractive for Syrian and Lebanese people to come and live in, we're talking about Athens mainly, one of the reasons why it's attractive for Emirati investors is precisely because it's in the European Union, it's in the Eurozone, it is a relatively safe place to do business. So, in some respects, it is exactly the Westernness of Greece that makes it attractive as a place for people from the Middle East to settle in or invest in. And is there not, if Greece were to dilute its own Westernness, would that not make Greece less attractive?
I think it's a great question, and it's one that comes up a lot. In the book, to be clear, I don't, the book itself says that, as I think I say in the book, Greece would be the last one to leave the European Union. The European Union is in no danger from Greece leaving. The Greeks are, as I say in the book, right? It's Greece that looks more stable than the European Union today, kind of in a twist, right? Which again says something though about these Eastern cultures and values. I think that Greece was able to lean on, in the time of the crisis, and it's why France kind of and other countries in the West look more shaky. And today, Greece, despite the economic crisis and the misery of Greeks, they've been able to do there actually because of those Eastern values. So in many ways, yeah, Greeks are the ultimate Levantines, I say in the book, and they're kind of able to play both sides of the coin. But that is the value in a multipolar world, right? That is what you want to do. You want to tap into that, and in many ways, that's what the great cities of the Levant did, right? I said there are three beautiful cities of the Levant, cosmopolitan cities of the Levant, cosmopolitan trading cities, 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 Smyrna, cities of the Levant, cosmopolitan trading cities, Smyrna. I don't think North Macedonia was that strategic for NATO, but the real prize for North Macedonia was to join the European Union. And interestingly enough, right, it's Greece that has always promoted Turkey's entrance into the EU. And Greece rightly sees, I think, the benefits that would accrue from Turkey being in the EU, because it would foster trade. And one of the things, actually, one of the very interesting, we haven't talked much about the Greek minority in Istanbul, which we should talk about because it's a fascinating community. But there was a period, there's 2,000 Greeks today in Istanbul. And there was a period when it looked like Turkey was going to join the European Union, when there was a lot of hope, actually, that the Greeks who fled after the CHP, Turkey's secular government, evicted tens of thousands of Greeks. It wasn't the Erdogan's party, obviously. It happened in the 60s. It was the CHP that kind of kicked out the Greeks. There was a hope in the early 2000s that had Turkey joined the EU, it would have led to this revival of the Greek minority in Istanbul, because it would have made travel so much easier, right? I mean, to live in Istanbul or Athens wouldn't have made a difference, and you could travel back and forth. So no, in the book, I do say that the European Union for Greece, it has been an asset in a sense, but again, it's because it's in the East that it's able to draw all these people as a safe haven. So it's having one foot in both worlds that matters today.
Well, that was fantastic. It's a wonderful book, and a wonderful audience, incredibly interesting. We've got the Greek ambassador here, who was nodding approvingly some of the time, which worried me a lot. But it's actually, I know there are a lot of other very distinguished people here, and I can also see your family are here and your fiance, and it's lovely to have you here as well.